JavaScript in London. Thanks for joining us this evening. And yeah, for those that don't know, I'm Matthew Elstow from Oliver Bernard, and I've been doing JavaScript recruitment for about 7 years now. So I've seen a lot of changes during that time in terms of the market and demand and things like that. But yeah, we've seen a big increase in interest around Next.js. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing Beautify's take on the topic. And so yeah, I'll pass you over to Carl Pierce initially, and then we'll have Redian as well, who's the tech lead, a bit later on. In terms of questions, can we sort of keep those towards the end of the chats, and obviously put any questions into the chat box as well. But yeah, I'll pass you over to Carl now.
Cool, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, a quick introduction. I'll jump straight in. Let me share my screen first. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the opportunity to present. It's Beautify is quite a new product engineering organization. We've only really just started, so it's great for the opportunity to share what we're doing and the team we built already. But let me share my screen first. So everyone should see the landing pages, what you saw on the meetup. Before I start though, can I have a quick introduction to Redian? So I'm going to cover the first part, which is who is Beautify, what we're trying to do from an engineering and a business perspective, and then how we're aligning our technology to achieving all these business goals. And then I'm going to hand over to Redian. He's going to walk through a lot more detail around the types of technology we're using and why, specifically around Next.js and Chakra. Redian, do you want to have a quick 2 seconds before I jump in, just to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Great opportunity to speak to you and share our experience with relatively modern technology for web development. My name is Redian. I'm the tech lead here at Beautify. As Carl mentioned, we're a relatively new team. We only started, I think, sometime August last year, but we've done pretty good progress, and we're glad to be able to share it with everyone. Thanks for having us.
Cool. Thank you, Redian. So let me jump straight in then. So the first one is really then, what is Beautify? And here's quite a bold picture, a bold statement there. And it's very much aligned around kind of the industries I've been working in all my career. So I've been in fintech for most of my career, and 20 years ago, the industry was dominated by large conglomerates who had a very one-sided relationship between consumers. And so there's always a bad relationship and a bad level of service for consumers in banking. And over the last 20 years, that's significantly changed. And so there's a lot higher, mature fintech community, of which there's a lot fairer relationship between consumers and large banks and conglomerates. So there's been a huge amount of disruption in that space. But if you look at cosmetics and beauty, it's actually lagging by 20 years or even more, as in the industry itself is dominated by large conglomerates who've got a similar, somewhat one-sided relationship with consumers, as in a consumer has to pay a significant price for a luxury product, sometimes $300, $400, even $500. But the actual price of that product is maybe over only $10. So again, it's a one-sided, maybe an unfair relationship that the consumer's paying a significant amount of money to access a luxury product, but the product itself is only worth $10. So they're paying a huge amount of the brand and marketing machine that sits behind with these large conglomerates. Again, looking back to fintech, that's very similar to the market that existed back there. So we've really at the start of this opportunity to start to do some interesting disruption. And I guess that bold picture is exactly that the market is really ripe for disruption. And we're probably one of the earlier pioneers to be able to start doing some interesting disruption around actually creating a fairer relationship between a beauty cosmetic brand and a consumer, so that it's easily more affordable to a wider audience beyond just the $300-400 kind of price tag for luxury cosmetic products. So how do we do that? So we've kind of created this notion of a beauty club. It's actually Beautify is around 5 years old. It was a surprise to me when I joined them back in August. But they're still really early on in their journey of digital disruption within cosmetics. And they've done that, or we're doing that, sorry, through a membership model where you can access products at pretty much near cost price, but to do so, you need to be a member. We use the same labs or the best labs in the world to create the product. So it's very similar or even better than what you can buy in the high street. But by taking away all the other middlemen, the markup, the retailers, the celebrities who try to, the branding machine behind the large conglomerates, we're able to offer the same product at probably 80% less than the high street. And so that's seen a significant level of interest in acquisition. So now we've got a pretty big footprint in the UK. We're also in North America, growing really fast. We've got around 100 people in Beauty Pie today. Again, most of that organization has been traditionally looking at the wet product, as in all the cosmetics. And so it's only recently then Beauty Pie started to invest in product engineering function, as in I was the first to join in August. We've seen a significant growth in e-commerce, as lots of e-commerce businesses have over the last 12 months through COVID, a huge mobile adoption. And so we're kind of at the start of building the opportunity around digital adoption of a consumer brand in a space where I think we could do a bunch of disruption. Anyway, that's enough about Beauty Pie. What we came to do to share with this group more so is the technology we're using or choosing when we're very early in our journey around digital adoption. Even though it's a 5-year-old business, we're starting to understand our consumers a lot more and what kind of digital services we're looking to provide. And the first bit we're looking at is actually the website, as in how do consumers interact with the services Beauty Pie can offer. Traditionally, over the last 5 years of Beauty Pie's growth, it's been done using a IBM commerce platform. Again, it's not quite what I'd have chosen, but it's got us to where we are at the moment. So we're starting to decouple that from that big monolith into now best-in-class decoupled services. So we have an e-commerce platform providing e-commerce services like add to bag and checkout and things. But right now we're building the client-facing elements of the consumer-facing things, which is the website services. Why are we focusing on that first? Well, I think if you looked on our site, it's a very complex and busy relationship with a consumer who's new to Beauty Pie as a brand. I'd never heard of them, and lots of my friends had never heard of Beauty Pie. So there's a significant level of friction, both on terms of the brand and the name. It's like trust in that brand. You're going to put this on your skin. Do you trust the product enough? Do you understand our business model, which is different than a transactional business model? You have to join and make some level of commitment as a member of the club to access products at a lower price. And so there's already a bunch of friction already in the user experience before we even start to think about UX and design and creating a really simple digital experience to allow users to shop. And so we're looking at re-platforming that element of the service today, whilst we continue to use a lot of the other services. So today is really focusing on what technology is out there for that bit of the jigsaw, and how did we decide on what's right for Beauty Pie. There's actually there's probably an overwhelming choice available. I mean, here's some examples around like responsive and adaptive and progressive and native and single page, and there's all these kind of technologies and words that people use quite flippantly, often sometimes misused or misunderstood. And if they aren't used correctly in the right context and choose the right technology for the right business problem, it's huge cost to a business in terms of acquisition or making the wrong decisions and have to wind back those decisions and start again. These types of decisions right early on in the acquisition channels can be quite expensive. You don't have a quite an informed approach around what you're choosing and why. We could also fold on all the other technologies around Vue and Next and React and Chakra and Gatsby and all the other kind of other specific technologies to achieve kind of our goals. And again, it's overwhelming the types of choice you have available. So why did Beauty Pie choose Next.js and Chakra? So I was going to go through now the specifics around the website design and things like that. Why did we choose a reactive PWA server-side static generation site? Before then, I hand over to Reddin, who can go through the specifics around Next.js and Chakra and other things that we've built as an engineering function as we start to scale. So the first thing is really, before we get into the details, well, what we're trying to achieve as a business. In that, I mean, it's probably, you'll see very similar things across all e-commerce platforms. So multi-device, mobile first. again, a very common thing that I'm sure every e-commerce organization will aspire to be. Mobile first, of course. The majority of our shop is done on mobile device. Again, we're very similar to lots of other e-commerces. But multi-device, we want to create a service which is hugely accessible and easy to use, no matter what platform they're trying to use it, whether it's on their mobile, on a tablet, on a desktop, on a 42-inch screen at home, on Alexa. Again, a very accessible service to allow people to shop whenever they want to shop. We want it to be super fast, lightning speed. Why? There's a huge correlation between the speed of the site and the acquisition. So a 1 second delay in a page load time equals around a 10% reduction in acquisition on shopping. So the faster the service, by far the better for a great experience and a great shopping experience and high acquisition. But also around the next one, around discoverability. Google and all the other indexers see the site speed as by far the most important element of when they're indexing the site. So the higher the speed, the more likely that we're going to be, I mean, there's lots more to it than just speed, the more likely we are to be up there in the top search results for when people are searching for cosmetic products around what we cover in Beauty Pie. So speed and discoverability are really important parts of the technology we want to choose, so that we can always appear in everyone's organic search for lipstick and cosmetics and things like that. I mentioned earlier around friction. So again, we're a brand new brand with new products that people are going to put on their skin, with a new business model around membership. It isn't a transactional e-commerce. So there's already a bunch of friction in terms of acquisition that we have to live with. That's the nature of growing a young business. So we are acutely aware of any friction in the digital relationship is an absolute minimum. We'd have to try and keep friction to a minimum. And I'll go through some of what those friction points could be and how we've tried to minimize or eliminate them. Of course, it's going to be safe, and we're going to try in the modern world, when people may not have the strongest bandwidth or being online or on the tube, latest technologies allow users or consumers to actually shop anywhere, whenever they want to, even when they're offline. And again, I think as we start to make it an accessible service on multiple devices, having the ability to shop online is going to be a really important part of our technical engineering ability, so that, again, it's easy, discoverable, and low friction. So these are kind of the overarching business functions. So how do we align our decisioning to achieve these kind of business goals? The first one, again, a somewhat random order, but the first one was really around, well, from a UX perspective, like, how do we want to build the site? What do we want it to look like? And there's kind of two ways which we started to think about it, either from like an adaptive approach, which is what Amazon do. So what that means is they can build one specific site for every type of device. So here's an example for a desktop. They have a wholly different experience to compare to a mobile, compared to a tablet. So they're actually building multiple websites, and each website is optimized for that specific device. So they may see a video on one, you may see a completely different website on another one. A very, what's called adaptive approach to UX design. And compared to the other one, which is responsive, saying, well, all the assets are largely the same, irrespective of the device you're going to work with. And then it reorganizes the assets on the screen to optimize around the size of the screen you're on. So we went with responsive, largely because, going back to the number of channels that consumers engage with us from a commerce perspective, it's very, very difficult to plan and build product around every type of device that's out there, from a 42-inch screen, which people shop on, through to a desktop, a large screen desktop or a small screen, through to a tablet, through to an iPhone 5. And so trying to build multiple websites for all those different devices was just inordinately complex, and we'd have to maintain lots of different versions, like Amazon, I'm sure, has to as well. So we went with more like what Starbucks do, as in a responsive. It's a similar experience. It's got value from a UX perspective as well as familiarity. So if they're shopping on desktop and then shopping on mobile, they don't have to think twice around how the site's organized. It's just organized slightly different, but it's not a significantly different experience. But for engineering also, we've got to do things once, which we didn't really want to have the overhead of doing things 5 times or 6 times for every possible combination of different devices. So that's the first decision, quite an easy one. The next one is really, well, what kind of experience do we want to create? Would it be like a native app, or would it be a progressive app, or would it be some other kind of digital website? And we went with progressive. This is probably one of the harder decisions because a lot of organizations think about native and native shopping, and especially when our membership, it kind of aligns itself very much to a repeat business and using again and again and again, something which again lends itself very much to having a native app on your phone. But going back to friction again, we're trying to minimize the friction as for consumers. We want people just to come in and shop. And so there's quite a lot of friction for a consumer to find us on the store, to then download us, maybe even have to make space on their phone to delete another app before they can load our app. And there's a lot of friction actually for a consumer to even start to shop when they have to go to an app store to find us. And with friction being one of the more important elements, we want to reduce that as much as possible. We actually went with a progressive app, saying, well, actually, we want to have a mobile first type of experience. We want to have a native-like experience, which progressive can give. But we want to remove all that friction as well. Progressive also gives a lot of other benefits. It allows shopping offline. It allows connectivity when you've got low network as well. So you can still continue to shop with a pretty poor connection service on your mobile. It supports responsive, and there's a bunch of other benefits as well. Shareability. You can also create a link on your home page as well on your phone, which looks like a native app. So you can do lots of things that native apps can do, and I think it can enable us to go a lot faster in the shorter term, whilst we work out, well, is there a need for a native app down in I don't know, months or years time for Beauty Pie? Not yet, but we went with progressive first. The reason why it was the hardest choice, though, is because progressive obviously is a Google technology, and so Apple are lagging a little bit, and so we'll be only serving half our audience around progressive experience. And so what does that mean to the other half who's got iOS experience? Well, it doesn't mean that much in the early days, but when we start to use more richer progressive services, maybe in a year or 2 years' time, there may be a need to actually build native apps as well. But again, it's a long time off. Let's go with what we need today. A few more then before I hand over to Redin. So we understand how we're going to build it, how we're going to deploy it, what type of experience we're going to have. Then the final kind of decision is, well, what type of rendering technology are we most interested in, why? And so I guess there's two real decisions here, a little nuance around static sites, but client-side rendering is obviously one of the approaches we could have gone with. It allows a faster response because the website is going to be served to the customer very, very quickly. And then the website will then organically render on the client side as it grows. Some of the disadvantages there for us specifically was around that organic search element. It's a slower user experience as a whole because they need all the shopping experience, but it's not as discoverable as server-side rendered sites. So the actual page is rendered on the server. Obviously, that's a slow experience because then the user's got to wait before the page is fully built on the server and then served over to the clients. But it allows it to be a lot more discoverable by the bots. But we actually went with static sites generation, which is another step away from server-side rendering, because then it treats those assets that it builds more like images, which then can be distributed onto CDNs. And so it creates an incredibly fast experience. We're seeing page loads of below 100 milliseconds for some of the pages we're serving around the static content, which is incredible speed, both for the end consumer and for discoverability. And so, so that's really driven a lot of our technology decisions that Redin will touch on shortly. Finally, then, before I hand over to Redin, some of the earlier benefits. We've not moved the whole site over to the new one yet. We're starting to segment it and move it incrementally instead of having a big bang. So some of the bits we've moved over already are seeing some incredible results. Again, our performance score on Lighthouse is nearly 100. It's in the 90s. Very few platforms out there can get anywhere near that. The leading e-commerce site that I could find had around 24 performance score, and that's one of the better ones. And so we've already started with a really high level of capability and engineering by using and choosing some of the latest technologies to allow us to align everything to our business goal, which is speed, performance, and accessibility. Okay, so that's around how we ended up with like what we're trying to build and why. So I'm going to hand over to Reddy, and he's going to walk through the specifics around, well, why Next.js and why Chakra. Over to you, Reddy.
Thanks, Carl. Hey, everyone. So yeah, as Carl mentioned, in the early days, our initial focus was to potentially do a bit of work with regards to the existing site. So we did improve the performance of the existing site, but at the same time, we also had to make some decisions on the technologies that we use to ideally to achieve a good end result, especially from a UX perspective. So our North Star in making those decisions was to try and get a sub-second page load times for our web visitors, basically visiting the Beautify website via browser. Majority of our user base are also mobile users. Therefore, the decision to try and reduce as much work, to try and reduce the amount of work that's done on the client side. Okay, I guess we can leave the questions in the end. We can go through the questions in the end. Sorry, just a question popped up. So yeah, so reducing the bundle size, reducing pretty much the payload that is shipped on via, from the server to the client was one of the aspects of us making decisions from a technical perspective to try and improve the UX performance. So one of them was Next, which is a React framework. Most probably most of you are familiar with. To be totally open, not most of us in the team had commercial experience with Next, and the approach we took to try and validate the assumption that Next is a good framework for us was to, we generally do that quite often, especially during exploration phases of new technologies and libraries. We do proofs of concept. So we did a few proofs of concept using Next and to try and see the impact that Next could have from a developer experience perspective, performance, and all the other key metrics that we were measuring. Developer experience was definitely metrics that we were measuring and validating the assumptions on, and Next has proven to give a very good developer experience. They have very good documentation, easy to follow, very good. They have some very good tutorial as well, simple to follow, very intuitive. Localized routing also was important. Our Beautify platform is currently operational in the UK and the US, and soon the idea is to create a platform that can have a very quick turnaround time and the ability to move quickly onto a new market if necessary. So Next on that regard performed pretty good. Server-side rendering and was also a requirement for us, and in the process we found out that Next also had hybrid capabilities of offering static site generation and incremental static generation, and these were very nice features that came out of the box with Next, and required a bit of tuning on our end. We had to do a bit of juggling and a bit of fine tuning, given the content in our case was coming from Contentful, a headless CMS, and everything is done with regards to the static site generation. Everything is done in build time. So that was an interesting challenge. We also had to think of how code and content schema go hand in hand together. So we solve that by using environments and aliases in Contentful, where each feature branch is matched in a one-to-one relationship with a main clone environment in Contentful. And once the acceptance criteria is met and the business stakeholders are happy with the feature presented in our preview environments, ephemeral environments, then once everything is merged into the main trunk, a new sort of main environment is created in Contentful. All the migration schema and migration scripts is run against that environment. And in the end, when everything is ready to go live, a switch is flipped but on the alias, on targeting the new updated schema and content environment in Contentful. That makes development experience very, very, very good, as well as zero downtime and with regards to deploys. Smart bundling also was a very, very nice sort of an automatic code splitting was very nice optimizations out of the box coming with Next. TypeScript support. So we also adopted TypeScript. Initially, we started just pure JavaScript, ES6, and then a few weeks into the project, TypeScript was suggested by one of our developers. And as with anything else, we did a quick POC and everyone seemed happy with it. I for one, very much like the IDE experience and the auto-completion that TypeScript came with, and all the benefits of having a type sort of system to help you use components the right way. I'm sure you can do the same if you just used pure JavaScript. There's ways you can enforce them, but TypeScript for us was quite nice. Image optimizations. As you know, BeautyPie is a e-commerce site focused on the health and beauty industry, which means that imagery is very important. So we couldn't afford to just throw image tags on the page and serve the highest best resolution image on the browser, because that means user experience would take a hit. Lots of network requests, lots of rendering, etc. Therefore, the next image tag introduced in Next version 10, if I'm not mistaken, was a very nice optimization to get out of the box. It has improved quite a bit in the latest versions, yeah, it's been very nice feature for us. Preview content mode and the easiness in configuring Next. It's also another feature, another functionality that we considered. And by preview content, what we mean is the ability for our content editors to be able to sort of render our content pages without publishing them, but to be able to see how they look without them being promoted to production yet. And this is achieved in combination with Contentful via preview content modes, I think they call it in Contentful. It's basically a cookie which is set on the browser, which can be used on the Next.js side to say which content state should the application fetch for. In Contentful, there's two content states, draft and published. So the preview cookie pretty much on the browser instructs the Next.js application to fetch the draft content rather than the published content. This is a very nice feature indeed. And lots of other optimizations, like especially with the out-of-the-box Webpack configs, chunking, and other automated like code splitting, the ability to only load what's necessary on the route, as well as the ability to prefetch assets or other routes if necessary. And the initial version of the static content work that we did was deployed via the Vercel platform that made development experience and time to market pretty fast. We were able to have our not the production version of the slices of the website as Carl mentioned, but the pre-production environment set up in a matter of days, and where we were able to get feedback by the business relatively quickly. Move on. And Chakra, yes, Chakra is a React UI component library. We initially were looking for ways or libraries or frameworks, CSS frameworks, to be able to allow us to build our own UI toolkit. From experience, most of our developers have seen the value of having our own UI toolkit, organized, well documented, and to hopefully offer us the ability to easily compose our UI interfaces. Chakra came as a suggestion by one of our developers. I think he might be on this call. I think I saw his name. Radu, if he's on the call, hello. So Radu, one of our developers, he suggested Chakra. He'd worked with it before, and he had had a good experience. At that time, we had 2 POCs in the making. All of us had experience with Bootstrap, with Material UI, maybe some of us with semantic UIs, pure CSS. But we had 2 contenders, and the last POCs that we were considering, one was Tailwind and the other was Chakra. To be totally frank, Chakra had a bit of resistance by the rest of the development team, partly because of us not being familiar with it. And but in the end, it was interesting what we uncovered. We built pretty much the same POCs for both using Tailwind and Chakra, and we put them through PageSpeed Insights to check how those 2 PLPs were performing against each other. And although Chakra meant so the Chakra POC came with a bit more bloated size in terms of its bundle. So the Chakra bundle was higher. For some reason, was performing much better in PageSpeed Insights consistently. That was a huge surprise to me, because the POC in Tailwind, I had worked on it, most probably had done something wrong, but I worked on it and I used Purge CSS and some other improved pre-processing works to try and cut down the CSS bundle. And the Tailwind CSS bundle was about 2 kilobytes of CSS, and Chakra still managed to perform better on PageSpeed Insights. Though, as mentioned, there was a bit of friction, partly because of familiarity, but I can now say with confidence that after a bit of a learning curve to move from a CSS mindset into a self-contained UI component mindset, where style, as you know, Chakra, maybe some of you, Chakra is based on style systems and emotion for theming, but style systems has this concept of styling via props. You're passing props to components that sort of force the look and feel of the UI of that component. Emotion, so on top of emotion for theming, it has very nice theming capabilities. It comes up with, I think, around 50 plus default components. The other nice thing about Chakra that we sort of came about to learn was accessibility. And most of its interactive components are built using conforming to the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative standards, which is very nice to have. Great defaults and very good documentation. And I might have forgotten to mention, but there's a very good community around the project. Very helpful with all the issues we had, as we had our teething pains in the beginning. And we were supported by the community quite a bit. And sorry, I forgot to mention our North Star for this UI toolkit that will allow us to build UI, to compose UI interfaces easily for all our developers, was the ability to compose these interfaces without writing a single line of CSS. And so far, with a relatively matured UI toolkit that we have at the moment, I think we've achieved it. So yes, we can build UI, we can compose UI interfaces without writing CSS because of the ready-built components, which are documented via Storybook and nicely documented by Storybook, and makes the ability for developers to follow their usage very easy, and collaboration much nicer. Right, quality, yes. So initially we were running fast, just like any other project, and at some point we realized that the team was growing, and we were probably running too fast for our good. We took a step back, and we reviewed all our sort of processes and ways of working, and we decided that we had to do something about it. Pair programming is it's a practice which is widely supported across our team. We leave it to the developers' discretion, or the developers' decision when to use it and how to use it. We're not too religious about it, and I know a few other companies do it by default, and there's tons of cases that they prove that that's a good practice. Therefore, we've introduced it, and we support it widely across the team, and developers do it as and when they please. Peer reviews, generally, when there's pair programming involved, we don't really spend too much on peer review side, but if I've worked in isolation on a given feature, I'd very much like my peers to be able to review it. And by peer review, we are quite elaborate in the sense that we're not just looking to the side-by-side comparison that you normally get in GitHub on your code changes, I guess, unless it's a one-line change. But if it's a major change which touches potentially a vertical of components or functionality, we check out the code locally. We run it. We run the test suite. Well, not really, but test suite is automatically run on PRO and PR state. But we ensure that we try and capture the context of the feature itself. which is something that you can't really get if you just look at the diff split view in GitHub. And yeah, we suggest improvements if we believe we can improve things. Unit testing and integration testing, JavaScript and Jest and React testing library were tools, were very standard tools that have proven very useful to us in years, and they see wide adoption in the team. Visual UI component testing, we once we decided to use Chakra and to build our own UI sort of on top of Chakra, build our own set of components or theme the existing components that come with Chakra, we present them, or we document them via Storybook, and we also incorporated Chromatic as a UI testing for these components in isolation. So what Chromatic does is takes the Storybook version of a component, renders it, and at the moment it takes screenshots of 3 different viewports, a mobile, tablet, and desktop, and keeps a reference of the baseline of that component and compares all future, say, pull requests or changes to those components. It does the same operation and compares it to the baseline. If there is differences, it flags them as something has changed. And one of us, when we do the peer review, also has to accept those changes if those changes are intended. But if it was an unintended side effects, we flag them, and we, that way we hopefully stop a bug from making it to production. Functional and visual diff testing using Cypress. The functional end-to-end testing of Cypress it's very nice. The visual diff testing of it's not, at least it wasn't easy in our case to set it up, especially taking into account the differences in rendering, the minute differences in terms of how browsers render or pages across different environments. Our CI/CD pipeline is in GitHub Actions, and the GitHub Action is, so the GitHub workflow, which was configured to run the visual diff test, was running on a Ubuntu container, while most of us develop using MacBooks. Some of us also develop using Windows systems, and we found that to be quite a pain to be able to update the baseline images. And it follows the same concept as Chromatic, takes a snapshot and compares it with the subsequent ones. So with that in mind, what we did is we then reduced the scope of the visual diff testing to try and capture only some of the critical components in pages, maybe some collection of cards and things like that, to try and minimize the false positives that we had with visual diff testing. We keep that to a minimum. We sort of we base it, or we develop more on the functional testing side. Performance testing, Lighthouse, as Carl mentioned, is integrated in our CI/CD. It runs as right after the deploy has completed in our ephemeral preview branches, and it's a very good indicator to let us know if we've introduced any degradation in terms of performance, accessibility, SEO, the PWA nature of the application, or best practices. Functional testing and load testing of the API, or contract testing, otherwise known as contract testing, is done using K6 and Artillery. static code analysis via SonarQube, which is very nice to give us a peace of mind as part of the CI/CD that we haven't introduced any code smells or any vulnerabilities. SonarQube, the defaults might be a little bit over the top, but it requires a bit of fine tuning once you get it to what you think is sensible for your project. It's a very nice automated service to statically analyze your code. CI/CD via GitHub Actions, as mentioned, has proven to work quite well for us, and we're quite happy so far. Right. So yes, in terms of continuous delivery, so developers work on their local machines. We're following what is generally called or known as main trunk development, or close to main trunk development, with short-lived feature branches, which once they are pushed to GitHub and a pull request is open, triggers a set of operations via GitHub Actions, starting with static code analysis, running, so deploying the feature in isolation at the moment in Vercel. We're also looking working in parallel to move some of it, or potentially all of it, into AWS, because Vercel is good for quick prototyping, but then as the project grows wider, there's a few other constraints that you need to think of it. Being a black triangle, I like to think of it as not a black box, but black triangle at times. You need to make some decisions, especially with regards to integration. So how do you do things like log draining and stuff? They do have some out-of-the-box integrations, but if you want something like training your logs, let's say in CloudWatch in AWS, you have to write your own application that integrates with your application in Vercel, and they have their own way of writing sort of these integrated packages, but that makes things a little bit harder. But generally speaking, for quick prototyping, it was really good. So the feature is deployed in isolation. Testing is run as, again, unit testing, building, linting, type checking, static code analysis. Lighthouse is run against our endpoints and reports and the pull request. SonarQube as well. Reports and all the other GitHub Actions, as you can see it on the snapshot on the right. The end-to-end test, the chromatic UI tests and UI reviews, and Cypress ones, and they have to be satisfied and green before a pull request is basically merged. We do have some checks as well in our local environments just before we push stuff to GitHub. That hopefully helps trying to catch any linting or any type checking issues or any build issues that could be captured in pull request. I mean, in our local environment before that reaches GitHub. This is pretty much it. And in the ephemeral environment, the test environment, the other potentially thing to mention here is that during the deploy process, we also have the what I mentioned earlier, the Contentful environment cloning, which goes hand in hand with, so pretty much code, schema, and content, they all go hand in hand, and they don't go out of sync. So this creates that nice stability, and also ensures that your schema and code and content don't go out of sync. That's all for me. I hope I've covered everything, and looking forward to questions later.
Thank you, Redian. That's super helpful. Again, given it's what, 10 to 7. Should we jump straight into the questions? So let me look and
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
some of these first. So one of them is, yeah, thank you for presenting. Do people really shop on their 40-inch screen and TV screen? So probably not yet. I guess I was using that to to explain that people use all devices, and maybe a 40-inch TV screen or 42-inch one, no. Although that said, my kids go browse into on the screen downstairs. So I don't think that's a primary channel for us today. I think it's really that we just don't know, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Our main channels are desktop, tablet, and mobile today, but even those give us a plethora of different challenges to try and service a good user experience on those like 3 types of devices. And mobile alone is something which goes from a very small device to a very large one, and that in itself makes it interesting from a UX perspective. So I think it's a fair comment that, yeah, it's not something which we are shopping on 42-inch TVs quite yet.
I can take the next one, Carl, if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So one from Tristan. Tristan says, do you know if you have a lot of customers that added your PWA to the home screen so that they have the best mobile first experience? Well, the honest answer to that, Tristan, is we don't think most of our customers have installed the application to the home screen, mainly because of the what Carl mentioned earlier, that our transition for the Beauty Pie website, it's a scale transition. So the application that is currently a PWA, if you guys want to have a look, it's the blog pages. And the blog pages is running, so the routing to blog pages is done via Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is our CDN, and we're using that to route requests between the existing Beauty Pie website, which is built in a legacy e-commerce platform, serving pages via JSP and etc. While the blog, for example, in this case, it's a PWA, and we've struggled to configure the scope of the PWA, considering these two are 2 different applications. So it might look like as part of the same sort of domain, but they're very different applications in the background. We are currently working on the PLPs and PDP. So currently we are in the process of building the shopfront. So once we have the shopfront completed and be able to take over all the traffic from Beauty Pie website, this is surely going to be an available feature, and it will pop up the plus on your Chrome plus bar. Okay.
Thank you.
I hope
one more from me, I think.
Cover that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Razvan, Razvan asked, I know Razvan, so how large is the development team, and do you have any plans to split in the app into something like Microfrontends, or is it way too early for that? Are you laying the foundation for something like that? So we'll aim to be around 30 people in product engineering by the end of this quarter. So by the end of March, we're around 20 or so today. And we're currently aligning around the value streams within our app. And so if you think of where there's value and how we align our teams around that value, that's largely how we organize teams today, so cross-functionally. And so we have a team which is a shop-based team. So how do we optimize the experience around finding the products you're looking for and adding them to a bag or a cart? A hugely important part of the experience, SEO and organic search really is really important there, because that's where Google are trying to optimize again on. So if somebody's searching for a product on Google search, that's where they want them to land up on the product that's best for them. But also personalization, that we want to be able to learn and understand our customers as much as we can through data and heuristics and science, so that when they are searching, it's not a difficult going into the shop or our e-commerce and trying to find it on every shelf. We know them enough to be able to serve content so that it's an easy shopping experience. So a load of innovation we want to do there. But then the next one is around the value stream around checkout, as in I've got stuff in my bag, I want to place an order. And so that's really covering for us right now, the kind of commitment element of it, as in we are a membership-based organization, and so the level of commitment before somebody places an order is higher. Yeah, the friction's higher, and so there's a bunch of innovation we're doing there with, and again, another value-based team to understand how do we iterate and learn around, again, reducing the friction at the point of order, and how do we deal with anxiety around commitment.
Great. I'm not sure, there seems to be quite a few questions, and I'm not sure we have enough time. Do we have a hard stop at 7, or can we carry on answering the questions? I'm happy to.
I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if it cuts out or not, but why don't you just try and get through them, and then if it cuts out, it cuts out. But yeah.
And if I apologize in advance if I can't cover all of them. Maybe we can write a blog post at some point, and I'll try and answer them. All right, the next one is from Matthew. Matthew says, how flexible is it to swap the tech framework once you've achieved the search engine optimizations Carl talked about? I mean, from server-side to client-side rendering. Well, Matthew, although crawlers, search engine crawlers have become very good at understanding client-side rendered applications, there is quite a high evidence from our SEO consultants indicating that server-side rendering, meaning the ability to ship the markup and the content as quickly as possible to the end user that renders on that initial load, or initial render on the browser, it's much preferred from an SEO perspective. So switching to client-side rendering would mean that we would potentially get a hit on the SEO side. There is evidence, and there is some articles out there which indicate that the Google search crawler, it's smarter and can understand JavaScript and try and render things as it will in a browser, but at the same time, we've got some indication from our SEO consultants that server-side rendering, or the ability to ship on that initial render everything that needs to be crawled, it's the much preferred way. So if we went back, it would be taking a hit on SEO. The other one is, would it make sense to use Next.js for intranet projects? Absolutely, yes. Next.js is just a React framework, and comes with a lot of optimizations and benefits out of the box. So yes, it's just a React framework to build web applications. Another one from Gavin. How did you make the decision between Next.js and Gatsby? That is a good one. So I was trying to think, I knew this question would come up. I was trying to think of an analogy. Next.js and Gatsby, if you were to compare them, I'd probably, maybe not the best analogy, but I'll give it a go anyway. So it's something like a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. Those are, very good super cars, but they have very different ways of manufacturing and different concepts in terms of functioning, I guess. They achieve the same thing, but their approaches are different. In terms of why didn't we choose Gatsby? Probably, I don't want to be technically incorrect here. I know Gatsby is a great tool and a great system. I'd used it in a personal project for a blog. The idea that Next offers you this hybrid operational model in terms of rendering, so you can render things on server side, you can statically generate, or even incrementally statically generate stuff, was very tempting, very desired for us. We are operating in a e-commerce business, and one of the highly sort of dynamic pieces of information, especially for products, is stock levels, and we wanted to consider that dynamicity nature of that piece of content. I know Gatsby, although I don't know Gatsby as good as I know Next now. I know Gatsby's approach to it can be achieved, but I think you have to go through plugins. But its general static generation of pages, pretty much just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in a folder-based structure with a HTML file, and do so it does everything you need to render that page, and then it has the concept of hydrating at a later stage by exposing the GraphQL API at render time. It's potentially achievable, but in our case, we picked Next. So I think they're both great technologies, and yeah, Gatsby would have probably done the job for us as well. It's just that most probably with a bit more exploration on our end, at least, because none of us had extensive or commercial experience with Gatsby. And the other one, are we okay to
more
continue?
ready? I think we're good then. Yeah, just maybe one more quick.
Okay, I'm just trying to. All right, I'll go in order then, so that So the other one is from Matthew. What would you say the upside skilling is? Is it easy to take up, and do you think it's transferable? Do we know what the usage is in the industry? Yes, definitely. Next is an up and trending framework. So and learning it as a framework is definitely I would say is definitely a good skill to have. Lots of companies are adopting Next in their development. And is it transferable? Of course, I would say yes, especially moving from a sort of a create React client-side rendering way of thinking into the server side. I think it's a very common trend, especially with regards to performance and other optimizations and other operations that you could potentially offload to the server, which rather than pushing it to the client. It's a reverse way of thinking from what we were maybe a few years ago, but I think it's very very good to learn.
Thank you, Redian.
Cool.
Matthew, then back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for answering those questions, Redian and Carl. And yeah, it was a really interesting talk. So yeah, thanks for that. I know there's a few questions there that haven't been answered, so I don't know if Redian, are we able to share your details on the meetup if anyone's got any follow-up questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'll try. I'm just copying the questions from the chat at the moment.
Okay.
Please don't.
Yeah, I won't end the call just yet.
Close the call. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can do that, that'd be great, and then we'll try and get those answers back to people. But yeah, I know that a few people joined sort of throughout today, so if you missed anything, the recording should be going out tomorrow or the day after. So yeah, we'll send that out via Meetup to everyone anyway. So yeah, if you missed anything, you can catch up on YouTube. But yeah, no, thanks again, Carl and Redian. It's really interesting and great to get your thoughts. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks everyone for joining. Redian, have you finished copy and pasting, or do you want me to hold?
I did, yes, I did finish copy and pasting,
Great.
And I pasted, so we'll make sure we'll figure out a way to answer those questions.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I'll be in touch tomorrow then. And yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, and have a good evening.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Good, thank you.
Bye. Good evening.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.